It was most likely in the afternoon that I sat in that monotone office, listening to the dreary tones of the shrewd lawyer in front of me. Her bony fingers highlight each segment of the will and testament of Great Aunt Catherine. I can't say I remembered her too well. More images rather than memories. But she was sweet. I remember that much at least. It had been 2 decades since I'd been to that house of hers. I must have only been around 5 or 6. So it made me start wondering why we never went back. Besides, it was a much better thought than whatever the lawyer was spewing. Money to Dad, a necklace to Mum. Until she read the fated words, "And to my darling great-nephew." I snapped out of my trance and listened. And heard, "I leave my home, Fasham Manor, and whatever lies within it." For a moment, I thought I misheard. But as I scanned the will, sure enough, the words rang clear on the page. "I get a house," I thought wildly. "A free house." Granted, I didn't remember what the house looked like at the time, so it could have been any old cottage in the woods for all I knew. But stranger still, why me? That would have been a much better candidate. After all, he was her nephew. But yet she chose me. That stupid little boy she saw maybe 20 years ago. It was odd. Very odd. But to tell the truth, I would have taken any opportunity to get out of that tiny flat I lived in then. So this random act of kindness wasn't getting any arguments from me. After a visit to Mum and Dad, a cup of tea, Sunday dinner, and possibly the most painful direction service from Dad's old Roads of England books, I began the drive to the house. It was maybe a half-hour journey at the most from Mum and Dad's, which only sparked my questions of Aunt Catherine's absence from my life even further. If she was so close, then why not see her? My tiny car powered through the autumn winds, trundling over the stray leaves across the roads, until I finally left the urban surroundings and entered the eerily familiar woodlands. My memory twitched as I recalled sitting on possibly the most uncomfortable booster seat in the world, staring out of the window, watching the trees fly by, counting each one. I probably got to 16 before Dad called for me to pack it in. But he loved it, really. When I finally reached the clearing in my tiny car, I sat with my jaw agape at the enormous towering mansion before me, as if it was ripped straight out of a Millionaire's magazine. The light of the sun danced upon the tall glimmering windows, almost giving life to the bricks that linked around them. 2 tall trees stood guard by the front door, watching over the garden and water fountain. I couldn't believe my eyes. As I stepped out of my car and closed its door, my jaw not following its lead, I simply stood in the looming shadow of Fasham Manor, tempting to take it all in, with a deep sigh. "Quite the building, isn't it?" a voice chirped from behind. I snapped my head round to see where it came from. An estate agent, assigned by Aunt Catherine's lawyer, no doubt. She seemed a bubbly sort of lady, perhaps my age, a clipboard pressed to her chest. She extended a pale hand to shake. "Mr. Brennan, right?" Attempting to leave my dazed state, I shook her hand and smiled. "Yes, Catherine's great-nephew." She cut me off. "I'm Jennifer from the Beckwood Estate Agency. I'm here to give you a quick tour around the manor. I nodded with her, looking up at the mansion. You think you can give me a tour around this place quickly? I chuckled. She giggled in reply. As quickly as I can, Mr. Brennan. Please, call me Jack, I sighed. Jennifer unlocked the door and allowed me to step through. The interior did not disappoint. I stood shell-shocked once again at the sheer scale of the place. Winding staircases, carpets fit for royalty, armchairs fit for kings, and 4 bathrooms. 4! When I stepped into the living room, nostalgia fell upon me once again. I saw myself jumping up and down by a space where a Christmas tree once stood. An old camcorder in my face. Held by Mum, of course, as I ran around the furniture. I remembered a tall, thin woman sitting on one of the chairs. Regal and rigid in posture, yet warm and welcoming in the face. That must have been Aunt Catherine. Must have been. Jennifer asked if I was all right. I replied with a nod and let her continue. So, how old is this place? I asked rather oafishly. Jennifer flicked through the sea of papers on her clipboard. Well, it was built in 1764 and purchased by your family in 1852 by a certain Francis Brennan. From what we've done, we couldn't find much in terms of information, only that he was a very wealthy man from the oil industry. I listened with care. At least that would explain why Catherine was so wealthy. To think that I now owned a mansion over 200 years old. It didn't make sense, but at the time, didn't need to. When the tour came to an end, Jennifer and I sat over a cup of tea to discuss the boring legal bits. We managed to share a laugh or two in between. As stated in her will and testament, she began, you are entitled to move into this manor and possess all items within it. Everything you see now is yours, including what lies in the basement and attic. It has both! I exclaimed. Jennifer laughed at my outburst. It's yours to sort through as you see fit. I'm sure I can leave you some numbers of auction houses should you find anything. I nodded and laughed with her. After some chit-chat, Jennifer insisted that she must go. She handed me a small card and we said our goodbyes. The card had the copy-paste, call our estate agents for quality service, all over the front. But when I turned it round, I saw fluent biro writing that read, call me for a quality date. My face erupted into a smile. This house helps me get girls too. Get in! With a smile across my lips, I picked up the remainder of my cup of tea and raised it slightly. Cheers, Auntie, I thought. The moving process was fairly smooth, considering the scope of the place. I didn't have too many possessions anyway. Just a computer and towels and cutlery and what have you. And you'd be surprised how good a signal I got from there. Video calling Mum and Dad became a movie screen quality compared to the pixelated mess back home. Even if Dad held the tablet upside down. When it was all coming to a close, I decided to bring some boxes to the attic and begin sifting through it all. I might as well start from the top and work my way down, I thought. The attic door was neatly hidden in the ceiling of the top floor landing. I needed an umbrella to hook it down and let the rusted ladder trundle to my feet. But I couldn't help feel that it was too well hidden. I mean, why cover up an old attic? Shrugging off the thought, I made my way up the ladder with care. It wheezed beneath my feet, coughing out colonies of dust that scattered through the air. When I reached the top, I had nothing but the faint glimmer of light through the one narrow window on the wall. Luckily, I'd brought a torch. I flicked it on and was astounded by the amount of junk scattered around. Old, rusted, and even rotting junk. The bent wheels of a tricycle stick out amongst the dusty boxes filled with tacky china. The crooked lampshade, now snake-like in shape, looming over the remains of cups and glasses, was more of a dumping ground than an attic. The silence sent shivers down my spine, as if everything in that attic stopped to stare at me. It only took a glance to realise nothing of value was up there. And even if I did sift through, I may come out with some form of tetanus. But just before I stepped out, something caught my eye. Amongst the heap of junk, something stuck out. It was white, with black stripes down it, like a sleeve. I cautiously walked towards it, being careful where I treaded, and slowly bent down and began to unbury the strange object. It wasn't just a sleeve. It was an arm. A thin, spindly wooden arm. An arm that led to a torso. Then another arm. Then a leg. Then another leg. And then a head. It was a doll. A clown doll. He was dressed in completely black and white overalls. Dark grey patches covered the trousers. Its undershirt was stripy with long sleeves, almost covering the gloved hands at the ends of the branch-like arms. It wore an enormous bow tie around its throat that grazed its pale white cheeks. The empty eyes stared back at me, grey in colour and bleak in expression. Its mouth formed a crescent frown. Even the painted smile sagged and curled downwards. Tufts of black curly hair burst from its scalp like barbed wire upon a prison wall. But just beneath the bow tie was a small note tied around like a necklace with string. I turned it over and read, "I'm Aggie Andy. Be nice to me, or I'll cry and cry and cry." I'd be a liar if I said the sight of this thing didn't freak me out. The sounds of rain upon the window, followed by the gentle moans of thunder, didn't help either. I sat there for a moment, just holding it. As it stared right back into my eyes, I felt the cold finger of fear run down my spine. I physically recoiled and dropped the thing, rushing back down the ladder and slamming that door shut. The embrace of dust on my face was a much more pleasing welcome than that of Aggie Andy's gaze. I decided not to bother with sorting out that day. Maybe another day, I thought. Yeah. Maybe another day. As I steadied my breathing and went back downstairs. The storm only worsened that night. The once gentle shining woods became a swirling mess of leaves and twigs. It was most likely around 10 o'clock that night, when I was still powering through the paperwork of the moving process. Sign this, sign that, tick this, cross that. Not to mention the few bits and pieces I had taken home from work. However, by then, I was towards the tail end of it all. My bed only a few more paragraphs away. Jesus, did I need a drink. So I began walking out from the office to the kitchen. As you can well imagine, the house was big. So humour me, but I like to keep the lights on in certain rooms I visited often. So when I turned the corner to see the kitchen lights were off, I was confused. I hadn't been in there to turn them off in an hour or so. But I reasoned I must have done it without realising. There was still some light, so I was able to grab my water and turn around. But now the hallway light was off. I did not turn that off, I thought to myself, 100%. The estate agent told me the electrics were fine, intact. Guess I call myself some liars. I followed the dim lighting left by the office and took my seat at the desk once more, taking a big swig of water before picking up my pen and writing. My chair made a screech against the wooden floor as I sparked to my feet, feeling for the desk and the nearest object I could weaponize. I stumbled around the office, desperate to find the switch, my breathing erratic, my heart pounding, until light filled the room once more. Nothing was there. I was alone. I thumped my head against the wall as I pressed against it, steadying my breathing and opening my eyes as the anxiety passed. I went to put down the vase I picked up in the frantic moment and paused, deadly still. My hand was covered in something from where I touched the light. It was black and stringy in its droplets. It was like oil. I needed to go to bed. I kept telling myself I was just overworked and tired and overthinking everything. Even though I was sure there was nothing there, I washed the gunk away anyway. I must have one strong imagination as I watched it flicker down the drain, out of sight and out of mind, I suppose. But in my shame, I couldn't sleep with the lights off in my room. Just needed a lamp on or something. So I retired to bed. I thought if I just said I wasn't feeling well recently, the boss would take pity. He usually did. So I laid there, the calming golden glow of the lamp warming the side of my face, and with a heavy sigh, I closed my eyes. I never moved so quickly in all my life, my eyes opening and my arm extending in unison to switch that stupid light back on and leap onto my bed. I heard it, I know I did. Something moved. A singular black droplet fell onto my head. I raised my head, came close to screaming. On the ceiling, the same black oil was used to write the words, "I like the dark. Why don't you?" My lip trembled as I lowered my head, my eyes catching the trail of oil across the floor, leading to a pair of small black shoes attached to dark, patchy overalls. Its head slowly raised, its eyes now completely black as oily tears fell from them, its mouth wide open in a frown as more poured from its corners. It sobbed a gurgled, miasmic mess, staring at me. And then it lunged. The once small gloved hands now seemed clawed and man-sized as the twisted, elongated limbs coiled around my throat. I stumbled, kicked, bashed and writhed in its grasp, letting out an attempt of a strangled scream. I could not tell if that thing was laughing or crying, until my eyes met with a glass bottle upon the bedside table. With as much strength as I could muster, I grabbed it and smashed its end on the wall, turning back and jamming the jagged glass into Aggie Andy's face. Its arms retracted as it tended to its wound. My opportunity arose, so I sped out that room, still trying to catch my breath. But it was close behind. I heard its arms stretching behind me, knocking down paintings, ornaments, all just to grab me and pull me back into its choking embrace. I didn't stop running. Down the stairs, I even saw, in the corner of my eye, the now clawed, glove hand gaining on me, until I leaped down, burst through and slammed that door. I did not stop running until I reached the foot of the garden. Turning back and looking at the manor, I saw it. I saw the silhouette of the doll in the glass windows of the door. One arm pressing against the windows in the left wing of the house, the other pressing against the right. I suddenly found myself having more energy to run after seeing that. I ran all the way back to Mum and Dad's. I don't know how long it took, but I did. Just laid in their garden till morning, shaking until the moment they brought me in. When they asked me what happened, I just cried. It might have been a year after everything happened, when I was sitting in the waiting room of Beckwood Estate Agency, gently sipping the coffee Jennifer had brought me, until she stepped out of her office clutching a heavy box. Well, it took more than a few strings to pull, but I managed to gather everything on the Brennan family, from 1802 onwards, that is, she said with a sigh. I thanked her with a kiss on the cheek and took the box from her, asking if we were still on for that night. She said yes, thank God. I needed to know more about Fasham Manor. I was on the verge of obsession. But when people asked me why, I could never answer. I always had to make up some excuse that I was a huge history buff, despite getting a C in my GCSEs. But I needed to know for reasons I'm sure you're aware. When I arrived at the now welcoming old flat, I placed the box on the dining table and began sifting through. Francis, my number of great times grandfather, and the man who bought Fasham Manor, was a very wealthy man. He owned estates all over the country. Yet Fasham seemed to be the only place of them that he called home. He ran a very successful oil business, a widower, and had 2 children. 2? I thought to myself. I knew that Great Aunt Catherine's grandma must have been there. I knew she existed. But who was this other child? And why is there no record of them? Never told anything about that. So who was he? The answers went unanswered, until one final piece of paper could be seen at the very bottom of the box. I picked it up hastily. It was a photograph in black and white, crumpled and faded. A photo of a young boy, curly black hair atop his head, and a frown across his lips. Beneath the photo it read, Andy Darwin Brennan, 1852 to 1858. Lost his life by drowning in a vat of oil.